Hey, it's John and Mike, brew-suits.com, and we've gotten some messages over the last few weeks, months, years about New England, yeah, the last few seconds, about New England IPAs and any kind of hazy beer that are hop juicy bombs, and people trying to brew them at home, and what is the big complaint? And they're looking to us to somehow solve this issue, and the issue is oxidation. You know, I think that in the whole process and with this style of beer, you put all this effort, all this labor into
money.
Geez, I know.
Expensive
seriously,
beers to make, right?
all the things that you're purchasing in terms of like just the sheer amount of hops you're throwing into this brew, to have it to be this like kind of muddy water with not some hop aroma and flavor dissipating because of oxygen. So Mike and I talked about it. There's been some other emails sent to us about like these new miracle cures. So we'll talk about that.
Yep.
So I think the first thing we wanted to talk about was just like, what are the steps that we take to reduce oxygen in the process of brewing these hazy IPAs?
And we're by no means experts.
Hell no.
But I would gauge it by frequency of, if we've brewed, say, 20 of these over a certain period of time, we've probably only had a small number of them go brown or purple on us, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, you know, we're aware of that issue, so we've been careful. So that's how we sort of judge, or that's where we're basing our experient level as having some worth.
I know when I've been lazy. I know when I've had to rush something because it's the night before we have to post something on Facebook. I'm sorry, not Facebook, on YouTube.
Yep.
We're doing Facebook tomorrow. Okay, just so you know. But
different
no, it's one of these things where you're rushing just to, you know, get it together, and then then you have it, and I bring it over to Mike's house, and then clearly, like, I think we got called out on one of the smash beers. It's like, dude, that's oxidized.
Yep.
And so then I said, okay, well, I need to take some time and do this right, and like take my keg, purge it with CO2, do a very careful job of transferring it from the fermenter into the keg, and then, you know, burp it a few times with CO2, and then chill it.
Yeah.
Chill that thing as fast as I can and keep it cold in my fridge, right? I mean, so what other things have you done?
So, I mean, I think the area where you have the most danger of getting oxidized New England IPA is going to be obviously on the cold side. That's where you need to put 90% of your effort. And so, like John said, minimally speaking, if you're the type of person who uses a siphon and you racking into your a keg, let's just talk about kegging, you want to make sure that keg has been purged of CO2, and the best way to purge, unfortunately, is not to just seal the lid, attach your CO2 and burp it like 5 times, 20 times, 100 times, because you're really probably not getting CO2 into the bottom of the keg. So you really need to fill the keg with what most people do now, fill the keg with sanitizer. You can do what I do if you don't want to fill the keg with sanitizer, is I would put in like 1.5 gallons of sanitizer and shake the keg and stuff in order to sanitize, and then I'll top it off with clean water, and I've had no ill effects by this, right? So you still get some sanitizing power, but you're not wasting 5 gallons of sanitizer for people who are pinching those pennies. But now you fill it as high as you can, and then you push it out with CO2, and now you've really reduced the O2. Now if you take the lid off and you put your racking tube way down the bottom and slowly transfer, you shouldn't be able to hear it splashing around. The tube should go all the way to the bottom. If not, you want to lift the keg up so it is at the bottom, and once you've got enough in there that you can set it down so you get a good distance for your fall. You know how a siphon works. That is good. The slower you can transfer, the better off you're going to be. At this moment, I also want to mention this complete and utter myth that CO2 is heavier than air. Molecularly, it is, but practically no. Those gases are what's called immiscible gases. If there's any disturbance in the air, meaning beer rising forward, the gases mix. Air and all of its components, namely O2 and CO2, will mix freely in that environment, which is why you don't really have CO2 like pooling in places, because you just walk around and it mixes up. So there's no such thing as a blanket of CO2 unless completely undisturbed, which in this case it doesn't. So no splashing. The other thing is you want to be purged, right? So we talked about that.
Yep.
Now, the gold standard would be to do a closed transfer, meaning you don't open the fermenter and put your rack and cane in and then just let air go in as the vacuum is being created. You somehow attach a CO2 source at like 1 psi to replace that volume and let it go that way. You should Google and go online for CO2 capture.
Yes.
Some people are doing CO2 captures,
That's true. I saw that.
using that as their backfill gas as it goes through. I've seen some people uniquely actually doing a purged CO2 with the to the in, and then the out goes back up to the top. So actually you're creating it's a fully closed single tube. You know, you're not using some CO2 capture, which I think is just more equipment and more space, which I don't have room for that. So those three things, you definitely want to transfer without splashing. The next step of intensity would be making sure you're purged, and then the gold standard would be closed transfer,
Yeah.
and that's the closed transfer. So now let's move on to talk about to some of these potential miracle fixes or miracle cures, as you put it.
I said
right?
miracle. It's not,
Right?
but it's like it's wacky ideas.
Yeah,
like well,
and there's some potential scientific merit to some of it. So like one of the big things you see out there is, for instance, ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C.
Vitamin
right?
C. Yeah.
Now I've scoured the internet trying to read about vitamin C, how it prevents oxidation. I mean, vitamin C. Go to GNC and they'll tell you it's an antioxidant. It is an antioxidant, but that's a chemist's term. Okay, that's a chemistry, a nutritional term.
Damn chemist.
The thing is with using ascorbic acid is that I've seen some places where they talk about using it in the mash, and certainly you can use the antioxidant power of vitamin C to reduce oxidation in the mash. But we're talking about the hot side. I would imagine, as a biochemist, without going deeply into it, there's a lot of redox, reductive, and oxidative reactions happening in a mash that you probably spend your ascorbic acid in the mash anyway. Then you still have your cold side issue for picking up oxygen. So I don't think vitamin C in the mash does anything, aside from when you look in the literature for adjusting mash pH, because it is an acid, and you can use it in place of lactic or phosphoric acid. The only problem is ascorbic acid has a pretty low flavor threshold that starts to taste like vitamin C. So ascorbic acid in the mash, to me, is probably a somewhat defeatist thing. There is also some literature out there where people talk about vitamin C potentially being a super oxidizer. What that means is that the way it works is that ascorbic acid scavenges O2 and but then that scavenged O2 can react with sulfites, not sulfate, like gypsum, sulfites, like you put in wine, and you can actually make hydrogen peroxide, which is a very powerful oxidizer. And so you can actually create a chain reaction to oxidize stuff by using ascorbic acid. I just don't think that's worth it. Something that I haven't seen talked about, and because we're talking about this, I will bring this up, and this is an idea that I've hatched that I haven't thought about.
Here we go.
Where does the oxidation reaction comes from? It's actually oxygen reacting with what we call divalent cations like manganese, magnesium, zinc. They all have a +2.
Okay.
To create superoxide free radicals, and that's what gives you the oxidative reactions. Rather than focus on that, maybe what they do in the rest of the food world is use a little substance called EDTA. You've seen it on.
Yeah.
EDTA is a heavy metal chelator.
Oh, okay.
And that's why it's in, and it's FDA approved, right? It goes into foodstuff all the time. EDTA and EGTA are two substances that will chelate those divalent cations. If you take them out of the system, then you should be able to reduce oxidation. Now, if I had a brewing chemistry lab set up here,
we could try that.
That's where I would start.
Okay.
To understand the use of EDTA or EGTA in reducing oxidation, rather than thinking about using things that get rid of the O2, because you know what? The O2 is so plentiful, but the zinc and the manganese are actually limited. So and you have a better chance fighting that battle than you do the O2 battle. That doesn't mean, though, that you should not be careful about transfers, whatever.
Yes, that too, yeah.
So once you're on the cold side, you really need to realize that you're on the cold side, and you want to keep those beers cold. Once you transfer, you want to chill it down, you want to start your carbonation, and you just want to always keep it cold forever and ever and ever, because that slows down the reactions. For every I can't remember what it is, for every degree Celsius that you go up, reactions increase their rate by tenfold or something like that, right? So
define the cold side. Is that once fermentation is over, or is that when fermentation starts?
Traditionally, from a homebrewing perspective, the cold side means anything after the boil.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
But I'm saying use that term cold side to remind yourself, I need to keep this thing cold. So get it down to 40 degrees or less and keep it there. Once you've packaged that beer, keep it cold. Because if you have picked up some O2, it inevitably, as a home brewer, even with a closed system, you're picking up O2. You just don't have the equipment to do it any other way.
Okay, so last thing, because we've talked, I think we've given some good ideas. I'd like to hear more about this new experiment you've just, you're gonna get your chem bench.
On the world, I'm unleashing it on the world.
EDTA, is that what it is?
EDTA, yep.
Okay, can't wait. What we need is more additives.
Yes.
Beers, yes.
It's already in your food. You've been consuming it since you were a child, so you might as well just keep sucking it down.
So I think we've talked a lot about transferring from fermenter into keg. I think the other thing that we get a lot is like, well, I'm bottle conditioning these hazy IPAs, and they don't last that long, or they're oxidizing in the bottle. Yeah. What do you say about that?
I think the biggest problem with bottle conditioning the traditional way is you're going to rack that into a bucket where you have no way of purging it. You have no way of really.
True.
And remember what I said about the gases freely mixing. Even with you moving around in the room, even if you somehow could fill that bucket with CO2 with dry ice or something, you move around. Don't do that. You move around. You're going to mix those gases.
Okay.
You're just going to mix. And while it sits there and you're bottling, fill in a bottle, cap in a bottle, fill in a bottle. And if you had two people, you could go a little faster, but now you got two people mixing the air around, okay? Right? Don't do that. So I just think bottle conditioning is great. And I know there's some people there who talk about, well, yeast will scavenge oxygen. The reality is you're probably going to kick off those oxidative reactions with all that divalent cation around pretty quickly, such that the yeast, by the time they wake up from a fermentation and go, oh, there's O2 around and there's priming sugar, I'm going to do some of this stuff, you'll probably start to oxidize to some extent. Maybe not noticeably, maybe enough just to push the color, maybe not the flavor, I don't know. But long-term flavor stability, once you create those oxidized characters, they tend to, those oxidized compounds tend to continue to stale the beer themselves, right? So from a bottle conditioning standpoint, probably pretty hard to do. You know what, if you didn't want to get into kegging, because you don't want to buy a tank, you don't have a regular, you don't have a kegerator, I would recommend this. If you really want to bottle condition, I would buy a 5-gallon keg. And I would do what we talked about, racking it to there. You can buy small equipment for purging the space a little bit, or do a CO2 trap in a keg, fill that keg, and then use that keg somehow with like a beer gun to fill bottles. Where you can purge bottles quickly with CO2 and immediately fill and cap, right? Maybe even, condition the keg. I haven't fully thought this idea out through, but if you really don't have the room for a kegerator, you could still use a keg as a tool to get the beer in it and to have it sealed while you're doing the bottling operation. And maybe a small, some sort of small CO2 cylinder of some sort, not have a full kegging setup. So it's possible, but depends on how far you want to go.
Yeah.
With almost everything in this hobby, right?
But that's the thing about the hobby. It's like, I always want to go a little further.
You can work in plastic buckets, or you can you can have a brewery now that you don't even leave your living room. You just do it from here. And it just happens in the garage.
Yeah.
So
click on it. So, all right. So that's what we have to say about the topic for now. I'm sure that there's more to be said, and certainly we'd love to hear your experience too when it comes to transferring hazy IPAs from the fermenter to your packaging vessel, whatever that may be. And any tips you have, put them in the comments below, because I think that the more experience we can get out there and talk about, I think the better off we'll be. Because I think, I think that's how I learned. It's like you make a mistake, you're like, all right, I'm not going to do that again. And you take all the steps that you need to take so that you don't have that issue. So I'd love to hear your experience.
Tell us your comments.
Exactly. So we do this every week. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We not only just talk about the beer brewing process, we actually, taste beer and brew beer and all kinds of stuff. So for John and Mike, brew-dudes.com, brew on.
Cheers.